Welcome to the penultimate session of the Sag Harbor Initiative. I'm Friedan. I'm the moderator of the panel on values, retreat from equality. And I'll introduce the distinguished panelists and diverse panelists that we have here. On my far left is Amy Swerdlow, who was a father of Women's Strike for Peace, professor of history and women's studies at Theodore College. Roscoe Brown, president of Bronx Community College. Of the City University of New York. Anita Brill, political scientist, author of the prize-winning Dimensions of Tolerance. Forrest Church, pastor of All Souls Unitarian Church in New York, and columnist, a column called Fundamentals, nationally syndicated. And Eleanor Holmes Norton, the distinguished former head of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission of the United States. And on my far right, Amitai Etzioni, professor of economic theory at Harvard Business School and author of a new book toward a new economics for 1988, The Moral Dimension. And next we have Theodore, former president of Swarthmore College and the head of the Eisenhower Foundation. Robin Chandler Duke, who is the former president of the National Association for Abortion.
National Abortion Rights Action, NARA.
Yes, National Abortion Rights Action. And then we have the great novelist Kurt Vonnegut and Tony Lucas, Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Common Ground. Now, I'm going to start the panel to literally discuss the retreat from equality and to put to Eleanor Norton the question, what has been the effect of the abandonment by both the Reagan Administration and, to a great extent, the courts of the goals of equality and of affirmative action?
Well, the courts less, because the courts have to follow their own precedents, at least for a while, or at least until the Supreme Court changes. And even then, for a long while, because precedents have that effect. Politics is something different. And the retreat from equality in the 1980s has been unfortunate on a number of profound levels. On a fair number of issues, in a country as big and diverse as this, national leadership doesn't make a lot of difference. People believe what they believe, they do what they do in their local communities, their mores survive political administrations. Equality happens to be one of the 3 or 4 issues where national leadership has always made a difference, whether that national leadership was affirmative or negative. The reason the retreat, in my judgment, matters so much today is that in a very real sense, equality is a very new idea. We, of course, accept it as axiomatic. You can't sound as if you are racist, even though racist things go on all about us. Sexism, everyone disdains, at least expressly. But the fact is that on any historical map, equality is not an ingrained part of this society, and I might add, of almost any other diverse society. Equality is very much of an acquired taste worldwide, and certainly in a country that has had, whose native history derives as much from slavery as from any other single idea. So equality as a living idea, as something more than a piece of parchment, for example, on which the 14th Amendment was written, essentially begins somewhere in the 50s, doesn't truly catch fire until the people make it live through a mass movement that essentially converted people, almost in some ways with a kind of religious fervor in the 1960s. To get an idea, it seems to me, how new the idea is and why it needs reinforcement until it becomes a that, when the Brown decision came down in '54, it rattled the country. There was no consensus for it. It was considered a usurpation of power, and everyone considers it now a given ought to refresh his or her historical memory. The idea of racial equality, therefore, is only a generation old. The idea of women's equality begins yesterday. Said Betty Friedan. And here you're not fighting as with racial equality against some perversity. It was a perversion largely because people hadn't lived together in different races of people in different cultures, so racism had to be invented once people did live together across ethnic and racial lines. But sex inequality, which is a matter of the millennia, goes so deep in, there's no society in which it has not been a deep and fundamental part. So that idea, in order to root out, will take the most extraordinary kind of leadership. What happened in the 1980s? We were working up to some kind of consensus that, as we can see by recent weeks, we had not understood it before. It even taken hold in the parts of the country where there was the least consensus on race. And we get to the 1980s, and suddenly and abruptly, leadership on matters of equality does not diminish. We saw the diminution of that with the Nixon administration. It does not diminish. We can take that and still move forward, but reverses before the idea has become deeply embedded in the society. As a result, because it took place in the 1980s, and the idea for racial and ethnic minorities was only born, really, in the 1950s, and for women only in the 1960s, negative leadership so soon after the idea was and has had an extraordinary effect. In the face of that, all I can say is that it has been remarkable that the American people appear to have gone back no further than they have on questions of race and sex equality.
Tony, you traced in the common ground, you traced evolution for the 10 years since the Boston turbulence in Boston. How do you think, what do you think? Is there about the retreat for equality and how deep is it, or is it more of a, is it remarkable that it hasn't happened?
We have been accused here of perpetrating radical chic, a notion which I think will then be rather deftly skewered in his opening remarks. Just one more word on that. Radical chic is perhaps the New York Review of Books printing instructions for making Molotov cocktails. But radical chic is not, in my view, writers, artists, editors, intellectuals spending 3 days grappling earnestly and responsibly with society's critical issues. Nonetheless, I think we ought to recognize the limits of who we are and what we're about. As we look around us, we can see that we are almost exclusively upper middle class Americans. Articulate, well-educated, very comfortable, indeed privileged. Many of us here because we are fortunate enough to own second homes in this lovely part of the world. And by the same token, it seems to me that much of the considerable passion generated in this room over the last 2 days has been over our rather parochial concerns. Who gets book contracts, and magazine assignments, and foundation grants, and consulting jobs, and policy-making positions in universities, cultural institutions, and in government. And these are surely legitimate concerns. I think, of course, it matters very much that a woman should one day soon be editor of the New York Times, or that a black teacher should one day soon administer the NEH. But if the Sag Harbor Initiative is partly about the 1988 election, and how to put a Democrat back in the White House, and how to give him or her a congressional majority that will support progressive programs, I think we need to recognize that our coalition needs to be very much larger than that which is represented in this room today. We need to find a language for communicating with people who are not here, and who, if they were here, might not care very much about the things that we care about. Specifically, I think we need to find a way of talking to the white working class. If we ask ourselves why Republicans have held the White House for 15 of the last 19 years, the answer, I think, is we have lost much of the white working class, a group that was at the heart of the New Deal and Fair Deal majorities of prior decades. In groups like this, the white working class is often perceived as the enemy. Indeed, there was one speech in the audience here yesterday which said that white males were the oppressors. We just frequently see the white working class as nothing but a group of Archie bunkers who oppose all of those things that those of us in this room care about. I disagree with that. In looking at Boston in the 70s, I was quite astonished to learn that as late as 1972, Charlestown and South Boston, which were the heart of the anti-busing movement, only 2 years later, turned out in rather massive proportions to vote for George McGovern, a man who was not generally perceived as being in favor of the embattled white working class of communities like that. They were voting for him not because he aroused enormous enthusiasm in their breasts, he did not, but because their loyalty to the New Deal and Fair Deal tradition was very, very deep indeed. Charlestown, astonishing Democratic community, until the mid-70s voted overwhelmingly for Ted Kennedy as late as mid-70s, turned vehemently, it is true, against Ted and even against Chip O'Neill. I remember talking to the mayor of Boston who told me about his efforts to find a campaign manager for Chip O'Neill in the late 70s. He virtually had to appoint one. There was nobody in Charlestown willing to come out and support Tip because Tip had supported school segregation. I concede that the white working class has often found itself of late on the opposite side of issues like school segregation that many of us in this room care very deeply about. I also believe that if we are going to put a progressive back in the White House, we are going to need a lot of white working class votes. And we have simply, in my view, got to find a way, find a language, communicate with white working class voters as they have not been communicated to effectively by the Democratic Party in virtually 2 decades. Not to pander to the worst in them, because there is racism and there is sexism and there are many bad things in the white working class as there are in the rest of us. Not to pander to the worst in them, but to elicit the best of them.
This discussion of the perversion of language is very important for this panel because, if there is any importance at all, the Sag Harbor Initiative, it is that we get our thinking straight again, and we get to the new thinking and not just do mindless rhetoric or evading the way maybe we have been evading before. I don't want to belabor radical chic, but I would much prefer radical chic to cynical chic. And it really outrages me that some newspaper not too far away, their coverage of the Sag Harbor Initiative, is unable to comprehend that we would seriously give 3 days to discussion of problems that do concern us deeply, even if we have been almost unconsciously retreating from them in recent years. But to go on to that retreat, what do you think about the way that the political party, and I have to say, the political party, the Democratic Party, going along almost with the Republican Party in changing the meaning of the term special interest, which used to apply to the huge, powerful corporations that we needed the democratic process and the right to organize to defend ourselves from. And now that term special interest is used to denigrate and dismiss civil rights activists, blacks, women, minority groups, and organized labor on the front?
Yeah, I think we've definitely been too passive. One of the things that I thought about when I was invited to come to the initiative was why the initiative. And after Bob Hirschfield and Bill Pickens and some others talked with me, I said it might be worth a drive out to New York City to find out how the other half lives, since I'm part of that half that lives in a concrete jungle. And as I was thinking about what I might say, I thought of an old Hobo aphorism. We've seen the enemy and he's us. And really that is the essence of the retreat from the values that our society has held. The reinterpretation of the so-called democratic dream, the reinforcement of the corporate takeover, the reinforcement of the collection of various forms of material acquisitions, and an easy acceptance of the concept underclass. It is absolutely vile, repulsive, that we can walk the streets of New York City, 3 blocks from the Empire State Building, and see children who ought to be in school coming out of welfare hotels at 11 o'clock, at 1 o'clock, playing on the streets among the trucks that are delivering to the affluent, and for us, for 3 years, not to be able to do anything about it. And the most recent thing that's being hailed as a victory, with the leadership of Dave Jenkins and some others, to get the kids out of the welfare hotels, is something's going to happen in 2 years. A 5-year-old child who's in a welfare hotel and spends 2 years in that hotel, spends 40% of the formative years of his or her life. And we, the powerful, don't do anything about it. We don't mobilize the moral indignation. We don't mobilize the political establishments. We certainly don't use the literally billions of dollars at our disposal south of Canal Street. So the question is, why shouldn't people look with some degree of cynicism on those of us the powerful, whether it be through the can or position, in terms of what we're to do? And I maintain that unless we seriously devote our personal energies, our moral outrage, our physical resources to redressing the development of the underclass in our society. In New York City right now, 25% of the citizens of that city live in poverty. It's almost like the commercial that says you pay me now or you pay me later. New York City will literally fall apart. We will not have the human infrastructure to go with the physical infrastructure. We will not be able to staff the corporations, the financial centers, the communication centers, if we do not address ourselves to this burgeoning, what we call underclass and accept. One of the things that happens when you're the president of a community college, you're fortunate in that you meet a number of people who are climbing the ladder. In our college, for example, the average income of the students is somewhere around $9,000. That's below the poverty line. Yet between financial aid, some assistance that they're able to get from their own motivation, a little job here and there, those students do eventually graduate and do eventually enter the labor market with an average salary of over $19,000. But it happens because they struggle against the system. I and some of the other folks at the college try to make it easier for them, but no, it's not easy. If they're going to college and they're on public assistance, they have to be in a very closely defined career objective that will end in a couple of years in order for them to maintain their public assistance. These are regulations that have been created by us, by the politicians, by the policymakers. And so long as we continue that line of action, that course of action, we, in a sense, are doomed to meet the underclass at the other end of the circle. because we have the balance of payments problems. We have the fact that we have literally lost the lead in manufacturing. We really are holding on to our financial and communications leadership, and that depends on people who sit in front of tubes and press keys and know what those keys mean. I don't know anything about it. And then finally, as Jesse Jackson is fond of saying, you can either give a kid, a person, a scholarship of $2,000 a year to attend a community college, or you can give them a scholarship of $32,000 a year to attend the penitentiary college. So we have a serious set of circumstances to deal with, and they're not going to be solved by fancy words and clever theories. They're going to be solved by passion and action.
I think that this is true, and I think that this, our panel at least, and on the Sag Harbor Initiative in general, that we have to kind of clean our own minds of some of the perversion of language that's happened. For instance, I have to say this because I read the panel this morning, and it's just soon, but I really cannot see accepting it, the Sag Harbor Initiative accepting the removal of Social Security or the deletion of Social Security for the old people who, because there is no Social Security, because they do have Social Security, are able to stay in their communities, and there should be more programs that enable them to stay in their communities, because once you put them into a nursing home, it's going to be $100,000 a year, in welfare. And the entitlement of Social Security is a valid and genuine entitlement, and it shouldn't be made a dirty word. But perhaps there should have been more talk of arbitrage and leveraged buyouts and the incredible profits of investment banking firms on Wall Street on non-productive manipulations of the economy. To this end, I want to pursue the question that Roscoe Rogers raised with Dory's friend, who is field in education. The retreat from equality affects not only the affirmative action programs that we hear, for instance, that sexist jokes are not acceptable in the office. That there is not so much effort now being made to look for women-appropriate jobs. I don't know if this is true of racist jokes or not. But there is another, even more basic retreat, or just as basic retreat from equality, and that is in the matter of education. Isn't that true, Dory?
It is indeed true, and it's terribly sad. Quality of opportunity in education should mean something for everybody. It should mean something without regard to gender or race or socioeconomic status. All of the themes have been touched already by the panelists. It should mean that. But in March '81, with a sister and brother colleague of college presidents in Philadelphia, we put together a letter to the Philadelphia Inquirer about the intended cutbacks in educational aid, particularly in student aid. That letter, given the then popularity of all that was being said in Washington, never was printed. I don't say it was suppressed, I just say it was ignored. We returned to that same fray in March of '82, expanded our group somewhat, had a press conference, and got some attention. And I found myself correctly quoted in the New York Times as saying, with the expansion of military spending and the declines in proportion to educational spending, what kind of nation are we going to defend? And that question, to me, is still the question today, after 6.5 years of these same policies. We have not only now the problems before us of educational attrition and wastage of human resources, but we have additionally the problems so well defined this morning, so well discussed, about our economic stagnancy and our really partial loss of ownership of our own country. How do we get out of this? Because
quality education is a moral necessity. We start with that. It's also partially a way out of the stagnancy and jeopardy in our national finances and economy. Because with equality in education, we have built up the largest rate of access to higher education in the world. We also can still believe, correctly, that our excellence in education is unsurpassed. I'm speaking now of tertiary education, even quaternary education. We're still very competitive. But we're apt to be losing that if we do not keep expanding access with equal opportunity and intensify the search for excellence. We are the nation that has reconciled thus far, better than any nation in the world, these two beautiful concepts, equality and excellence. And we have to continue that reconciliation actively with programs and passionately to pick up a good effort across the table, and with discipline and determination.
Well, if we are going to do that, then I think, we are all part of, we are, and we have our own responsibility about this, and not just pointing the finger at other people. My friend Addison came back from Washington 2 days ago, and she told me that she had been at a meeting of the Democratic National Committee discussing the 88 election. The word woman wasn't used once. Nor were any of the issues so very important to women and to families addressed. And the agenda in this week of 1987, addressed by the Democratic leadership. And Robin and I, who have been allies in the battle for women's rights, I know for a fact that in the strategy leadership planning that filed on the board against the board nomination, people like us were told, don't talk about women's rights. Let's not talk about women's rights. And God forbid that we would talk about abortion. And we were alone to some degree. Robin, what about this retreat? I do think that in fact this is some rationalization of an unnecessary process that doesn't even understand the situation that we're in now.
Well, first of all, I want to say that it wasn't the high-flown ideals that ever helped to eliminate equality. I mean, when it comes to blacks or it comes to women, as far as women are concerned, one little thing, the pill gave us equality. That drove the mechanism. And on the other hand, I will say I certainly do agree with my colleague concerning education. A young student from Namibia that I was speaking with quoted a remark, typical comment, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. And frankly, right now they're running to the hills, the political figures, because issues like abortion, issues like family planning, women's health, those are not the things they want to cuddle up to. And they're not going to because they don't think they have to. And on the question of Mr. Bork, one of the reasons we worked so hard with the coalescence of women's groups was to get that message across, that the right of privacy was paramount. And to drive that, we brought together all our groups, and we were successful along with coalescing with a lot of others. And I honestly do believe that it has made a certain difference to members of Congress. There are people that will come forward and help us. But there are a lot of them that will say to me, I'll vote along with this, for heaven's sakes, don't put my name down any place, or don't let me identify. This has been what I've faced for years and years on the fight to keep abortion legal and safe. And we've argued we don't like this issue. This is an unhappy issue, but it should be one that is between a woman and a doctor, and a very private one. And it has to do with the rights of women and men. And all I can tell you is people have helped me, supported me, and in recent months been more supportive than usual, but they don't want to be identified. And I'm afraid that's what we're up against with the Congress right now. let's please put that over on the back burner because we've got other things we want to deal with. And so it is very important now to drive the mechanism that this is healthcare. And we're talking about women's healthcare. And it's fundamental. And it must be addressed. And we just have to, I think, keep battering and making them understand it's critical.
Well, this retreat that we're talking about is a real retreat. And I think it's a retreat not only from equality and that value, which is a value that, costs people something. They have to change. But it's a retreat of values that have seemed to be so basic to the fabric of human society, not only American society, the values of caring and compassion, and the basic American values of freedom of conscience and speech and dissent. And Alita, I wish you would talk to that in terms of to what degree you think there is a rhetoric of retreat and to what degree there is a reality of retreat where the people are concerned. And I'm thinking not only of some of the political issues, but some of the new treatment of sexual issues, AIDS, for instance, or there's some anti-sexual stuff going on that I think is going to end very badly for women unless it's solved.
Let me preface those remarks, Betty, by just saying that I think this panel brings together much of what's gone on before, and I think we need to ask the question about what is it that Americans believe about equality. That is the difference between the notion of equality and the enactment of the reality of equality. If you ask Americans in the mass public, which my colleagues and I did for 2 decades, do you believe in equality for all people? 99% of the American public across all socioeconomic levels, across all occupations, across every creed, race, region of this country, 99% of the American public will say that they believe in equality for all Americans, regardless of their nationality, their color, where they live, their political views, their ideology, their opinions. When you then ask, as we have over a 20-year span, do you believe that Black people should have access to equal housing or equal jobs? Take it from me, we do not have 99% of the people saying that that is a part of the equality which 5 interview questions before they said all people were entitled to. So that when we talk about abstract equality, we've got everybody with us. When we talk about particular instances, we lose people. And when you start working through the variety of groups, which now are supposedly special interest groups, with civil rights for people of color, to women and to gay people, both gay men and lesbians, you just begin to lose everybody. And that, I think, is the retreat that we need to realize, is that we have never had a society that was willing to face up to what, in Betty's terms, equality costs. In a particular instance, we've had pockets of great fights and successful ones for civil rights for people, but we have not had in our society the norm that says equality must be worked for in these specific instances. I think this is going to play out in a very frightening way in the AIDS drama. I think it's playing out right now in a number of ways, and I'll just comment very briefly about those. We lose levels of tolerance, we lose levels of understanding and compassion whenever there is a threat, whenever there is fear, or whenever there is crisis. And in the AIDS battle, which is a public health battle, we have all of those issues. It is compounded, I believe, by the fact that the majority of the people that are suffering are gay men, and those people, because of the Hardwick retreat summer ago, which was a horrible decision of the Supreme Court, still are without constitutional protection, without constitutional protection under the 14th, under the privacy claims they went forward under, and they are therefore at extra risk. In what the studies that we've done about attitudes towards homosexuals and gay men in particular, because they are seen as more of a threat than lesbians, I think that's an interesting whammy in and of itself, and I won't go into it right now. they are so at risk in our society in terms of people caring to begin with, that when you then add this added health crisis that could potentially affect everyone, they are very vulnerable. The Black community is very vulnerable because more and more people are pointing the finger at the Black community because children are being born with AIDS and more people are suffering. And I think that it may indeed come down to be a woman's issue as well, because we are starting to hear a kind of rhetoric around the edges, if you will, that mothers should be educating their children about safe sex, that mothers should be taking the initiative against potentially risky sex. And then I think that there's another thing that could happen that comes to the whole notion of the Madonna-whore dichotomy for women. And I think many of you, at least the feminists in the audience, will be familiar with Elizabeth Janeway's fantastic article in Science magazine so many years ago called Who is Sylvia? From the Shakespearean notion of it, where she talks about Eve, the Temptress, and the Madonna. And even though the data suggests that women are less able to spread AIDS than are men, my suspicion is that because it involves sexual acts, because it's moving out of an exclusively gay community, we're going to see some real problems with equality for women in sex. And I'm now supposed to tell the following story, or my pal Amitai Etzioni will never speak to me again, and then I'll be quiet. And that is about sexual equality. We haven't had a lot of sexual equality. Gay people haven't, and women certainly haven't. And I don't need to rehearse for you the horrors of contraception, trying to get it legalized and everything. It's a fairly recent phenomenon, and Eleanor knows much better than I the case law on that from Griswold and so forth. But in fact, I would suggest to you that there's not yet a sexual equality. And it's true that the pill liberated us, but it liberated a number of us at great cost, which we're suffering from many health hazards, and I think we don't know yet what's going to happen to those of us who are swallowing pills for 20 years. I have a friend who is a very fine medical researcher who has been doing some studies for so many years about a male contraception that in fact is quite effective. It doesn't seem to have any terrible effects. It doesn't render men impotent or crazy. They don't seem to suffer from migraine headaches or blood clots. This researcher and her team are unable to get any major federal money for this. Why is that? Because this particular medicine seems to turn men's eyes slightly pink. It doesn't turn them red, it doesn't cause blurred vision, but it turns their eyes slightly pink, so that they look like they've been drinking or they've been carousing or something. And so clearly that is an unacceptable form of contraception. And so I end with that to just say that equality plays out in our society on many levels and doesn't play out in a lot of levels, and that I think we cannot address the notion of the value of equality without seeing that in the sexual arena and in the bedroom, we've got a very, very serious discrepancy between this honorific term and our realities.
The movie Fatal Attraction, if you think about the movie Fatal Attraction, you might see some fearful trends where you have the sexually aggressive career woman. She does drive me crazy in the end, but she is pure evil. And then you have the threatened housewife. It reminds me of where I came in 20 years ago. And then in addition, there's going to be on, stay away from those women. Anyway, never mind. Again, I come back that this panel is on values because without values, and a Christian's of values, not even education is panacea. And I'm wondering what is happening to values in education. Kurt Vonnegut I think last year, went to give a lecture at MIT, and he discovered some very interesting thing about the changing values of very, very best and brightest students to go to a place like MIT.
Well, could we talk about something else first? I just want to say that what we're gathered here, we don't talk about is the reason we have gathered here. When we talk about short-term thinking, what we are here to just talk about is what's going to happen to everything we have now when the excrement hits the air conditioning. The meeting this morning said that we are right over the San Andreas fault, and experts on finance say that it is surely going to crumble. If we treat each other this badly in a time of prosperity on borrowed money, how are we going to treat each other when the trouble comes? And I don't say the trouble's coming. The people who spoke this morning said. Now, Weimar was mentioned once. And I think you know what Weimar was the prelude to. And if the excrement is going to hit the air conditioning, the Nazi thing will start here. And that's what we're meeting about, is how the hell are we going to fight that? If we can't stop this tenfold aggression that's going to come along now, as to hear the experts talk, it was like the mobilization for World War I. Because once the mobilization began, there was no stopping it. There was no speech you could give. There is no speech you can give now to prevent this collapse of our economy, according to the experts. And so that's what we're really meeting about. I want to talk about MIT, if you like. I thought that my training is in science, my brother's famous scientist and all that, and I've hung out more with scientists than I have with writers. And it seemed to me that they should be guided by Hippocratic oath. It seemed to me that the president of MIT at graduation should do what is still done in a lot of medical schools, is to take this ancient oath, which has no religious basis at all, merely an ethical basis, as God is not referred to. But all sciences nowadays, all of them, have their origins in the wish to heal, either through a feeling of magic or whatever to make people better. So I proposed at MIT, I thought this would be very interesting to them, that some of them get together and take a look at the Hippocratic oath and to create a modern oath for all scientists to take regardless of their field. And mostly what the Hippocratic oath says is that I have these skills to deal in life and death. And I will not help anybody else kill somebody, although I know how to do this. And I will not knowingly make someone sick with poisons and whatever. Well, I thought this was pretty exciting, and they had a student paper there. And I threw out a challenge. Why don't you call it the Charles River Oath, or the Cambridge Oath, whatever you want to call it, and see whether it doesn't catch on. This was totally uninteresting. It's the least interesting speech I ever delivered, I think, with absolutely no feedback. And part of the problem was that they only work open to these people, and they paid a hell of a lot of money to get their doctorates or to get their masters or whatever. And they want to go to work. And the principal industry in this country, which is probably described, I think, as a white WPA. I don't think the country benefits from it in any other way. But they wanted to work. They wanted to have families, they wanted to have kids, they wanted to have cars, they wanted to have a house. And the only way they get it is to go to work for the armaments industry on SDI, incidentally. As you could ask each student, what do you think of SDI? It's a load of crap. It's a load of crap. It's stupid. It's real Goldberg. They all said that. They're all going to work on it. But anyway, that was, the people won't have any money to take that oath. I guess that's what I learned at MIT, and I learned it again at Carnegie Tech. I tried it again the next time at Carnegie Tech. No interest there either. Carnegie Mellon, I beg your pardon.
this is why I think that Kurt is writing is, but it's been right. I mean, our values are a reflection of economic and political conditions. They reflect a reality, and they in turn determine a reality. So we aren't just passive to it. And we have somehow let liberalism and humanism and feminism and civil rights activism and even social welfare become dirty words. And this is an attempt to stop that, to reverse that. I want to ask you, Lonnie, before I met him personally, I came across a book that he wrote a long time ago called The Active Society. And appetite had a profound effect on me, because it gave me some words of something that I just felt into the movement, that blueprint, abstract blueprints for revolution are not really what's all about, is not really what changes society, but a kind of activism that simply faces the changing reality that we are facing, that's in front of us, and figures out what to do about that changing reality. We are not where we were in 1930. We are not where we were in 1950 or 1960, but we are where we are in the end of the 80s. Amatai, put your mind to it. I mean, how do we become an active society?
Well, thank you, Mary. I first have a confession to make. I am against a radical shift. I do believe that those of us who are privileged should use the extra time, resources, and energy and education we were given to participate with those who are not so privileged, to change the society so that we no longer privileges. And so the notion that the privileged have to spend their weekend worrying about tax shelters or which Caribbean island they're going to visit, is the one I'd like to reject, and I'd like to call for more of us joining the Radical Shift Association, who realize that every privileged person has an obligation to all others. The other side of privilege is duty. I wouldn't become defensive and guilty until the folks to sort his name out. Now, to move to the essence of what's before us, as so often happens, it's left to the novelist to summarize the essences, as Vonnegut just did a moment ago. We heard this morning about the economic crisis, but we haven't talked about the social consequences. And I want to read it from there on for a moment. The crisis is coming. I don't think we can tell exactly when and exactly the shape it's taking, but a debt of $1 trillion extra recently accumulated will not be erased by some little change in revenue raising or by extra loans from the Japanese. And it's necessary for a moment to identify more clearly where it came from, because you can be sure that when the crisis hit, President Reagan would say that it was caused by the fact that we did not cut enough the social programs, but the Democrats raised here and there revenues by a few billion. So let's just want to establish clearly and repeat it till it's understood. And I think this should be massive. It was caused by spending $1 trillion on an unnecessary military budget, which did not add anything to our security. I want to make it clear, and the test that will come in the next days, weeks, months, that we're going to get a major arms control agreement, and still this administration will not agree to any diminution in the defense budget. They are already preparing the arguments that instead of having found this historic opportunity to hold back armaments, they will want to shift the funds to other armament budgets. Instead, indeed, I was personally in a meeting in room 450 of the White House. Maybe it was a valuable mistake. I'm one among those lists, which was explained to a group of business executives that the deficit is good because it prevents the Democrats from shifting funds to social programs. So let's be clear where we are. The deficit was created by an enormous, uncontrolled spending on armaments, which in the end doesn't even protect us from World War II mines falling around the Fury Islands. So if anybody thinks we both sexy that way, you should look at Stark and which the ship's supposed to turn around every time the airplane changes its position, and the ultimate defense against the missile was that the lookout was shouting, "Missiles are coming." That is after $1 trillion expenditure on defense. Now, where do we go from here? We have to realize that as this economy is going to get tighter, and we're just at the beginning of the process, the last increases in interest rates, the increases in mortgages and such, are just the very beginning of the process, because we will be squeezed and squeezed and squeezed again to try to make the farmers keep putting the bill we are not paying. And as that happens, there is a sociological island law, which already was mentioned. The societies get meaner and nastier, not that it's very loving now, as the economy gets tighter. And therefore, what we need most urgently is a coming together of all those who care about social progress to first of all protect what we got, and second, fight for expansion and advancement of our most elementary rights as minorities, as women, and as individuals. Our rights are being threatened. There is a retreat. So if there's only one worse thing, that we have not closed the gap between incomes of black and whites, is for the gap to be increased. And if there's anything more objectionable than we have not closed the income gap between men and women, is for the gap to be increased. And if there's anything worse than not passing the ERA, it is if the decision on abortion would be reversed. So what we're facing is not a question, can we get before us enough of an agenda of 101 items we're going to all pass next year? Though we have a need to have visions for the long run. Our immediate challenge is to get together the muscle, the power, so we can prevent a rollback and then move forward to advance on all these points. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time on spelling out in exact details new policy ideas. There is this media need to keep coming up with new ideas. There's no shortage of ideas. What we're lacking is in backing up the ideas we have with a sufficient political movement. And there are 4 steps it would take to get the backing we need. First of all, each one of us has to do more. We, of course, first. We have to spend more time and energy and resources on political action. Second, we have to reach out to some others. And each of us to take on finding 2, 3, as many as we can, who do not get involved, and pull them in. And thirdly, and I will not bring a round of applause for that one, is we have to put aside our differences and learn to work together again. We had a successful coalition in the early 60s which did put on the books a fair number of consequential acts, especially the Voting Rights Act. And the only reason was that there was a moment in which black and white and various shades of influence and thinking, they all worked together. We lost that, let's be candid about it. We lost it to a lot of infighting between various rights, between various shades of color, between various shades of policy. We lost it to infighting in the black community, not just between black and whites. And now, we're coming again, and I had a lot during this last day and a half of everybody coming up forward with their very special flag. That is thoughtful. I do not want anybody to put down their cause, but we also need a united front. So my suggestion is that we can have Sag Harbor Initiative in every American city and a nationwide initiative, out of which will come a ranking of our shared priorities. And let me be clear here. We need first of all consensus. So the lady would be willing that each one is free to put their policy idea on the agenda. Then we would vote which one we can all share in. It takes nothing away from the specialized groups each going on with their agenda. But we can identify which issues we can all share in, and on those we should put together rather than apart each other. Look what happened to work when we get our act together. And finally, I'd like to nominate my first item for that list, which we should start to generate in local and national town hall meetings and that is we have an opportunity now to cut the defense budget big, and that should be a very nice down payment to reduce the deficit and leave resources for social programs. Thank you.
Amy, you and I have been comrades in arms in several women's wars, battles, whatever you want to call it, this last 20 years. Amy was one of the founders of Women's Strike for Peace, and has been a very key figure in the feminist movement. You sense that we might be at a moment of a cross, my sense is women's rights in isolation, we've gone as far as we can go, that we can't retreat from it, but that we have to face the larger problems that there's got to be a new way of facing it. And I don't know, I remember how our movement started, and they started small. You had a lot to do with the students, you just have a sense of where people are today. What do you sense about the general movement?
Well, I think the work situation is very encouraging because I think students and most of us feel powerless, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I think that radical chic is not the problem. The problem is that radicalism is not chic, and that's really where it is. That being a radical is conflated with being a totalitarianist, a Stalinist, and all of that. If we don't have radicalism, we don't have liberalism. I feel that social commitment, for instance, is considered foolish. I'll give anecdotes about students if you want that. One of the brightest students I ever had, a male student, said to me, I'm concerned about the homeless. There's nothing you can do about the homeless in the society, so I'm going to become a stock analyst. In the 60s, maybe the books will make him say, maybe if people get together, they can do something. Female students are very worried about the lack of community, the lack of social cohesiveness of the women's movement. They feel that the issue of personal fulfillment, work, marriage, children is all a personal problem. You figure it out for yourself. There's no social movement that's stronger than personal as political is a long-forgotten slogan for some women, and it certainly is a reality today. I think another problem is that the continued polarization of gender values is really a problem both to men and women, to young men and women. And by that I mean we had a moment historically, and Betty was very influential in creating that moment, in which gender roles were more fluid. I think that's because of a time of social dislocation, a change in the mode of production, the industrialization, the service sector, the computer revolution, the need for women to be in the workforce, one, because they needed it for family income, and two, because the economy needs that kind of low-paid service workers. So there was a time when the so-called establishment encouraged the idea of independence for women, that they have to work as well as independence. But the fact is that the situation of who will take care of the children is an unsolved problem, one of the greatest problems in our society. And the whole idea of analyzing the gender divisions in our society is still not a primary issue to social scientists, to radicals, to political people. I must, because I've just died to do it, take the opportunity to talk about the defense establishment in a different way, from a very good way that all of you have talked about it before. A woman by the name of Carol Cohen has just written an article in Science about the masculine language of the defense establishment, the way it's genderized and polarized. It's a stand-up tall language, caring, commitment. They're all female values, they're soft values, they're not go-for-it values. And this woman spent a year at MIT and Harvard with defense intellectuals. This is what she calls them. And this is the way they talk. First of all, the reason for nuclear weapons is that you get more bang for the buck. The MX missile is to be placed in certain silos because they are nice holes. There are soft laydowns, deep penetration, comparative advantage of protracted attacks versus spasm attacks. We need to harden our missiles because the Russian missiles are harder. There's even a question of rule envy. The first atom bomb was called Oppenheimer's baby. The second bomb, or the hydrogen bomb, was called Teller's baby. But there are a lot of people who don't like Teller, So they called him not the father of the bomb, but the mother of the bomb. So we have to, I'm not saying that language is the only reason we have a nuclear establishment, but the way in which the values of hardness, penetration, trust, competition, gophering, are really core values that undermine social commitment. It's bleeding heart liberalism that we hear about. Caring about people is out of style. And I think that events like this can put caring about people back into style. Historically, in America, the conflict between individualism and community has been a problem. We come out of an enlightenment that talked about the rights of individuals. We believe in the rights of individuals, but we have not stressed the needs of community sufficiently. And of course, the economic system, which somebody dared to call capitalism, has a little bit to do with it. And it's our style to call the system capitalist, or to even suggest that there could be another kind of system. And I think that's because socialism has turned out to disappoint most of us who think about these issues. And students know that it's disappointing. They don't have a dream. Martin Luther King led a movement that had a dream. I think we don't have a dream. And meetings like this can give us the dream.
I'm going to put this question to Forest Church, because we're getting down to something that is even more basic than some of the rhetoric that we use to talk about these things. And I don't think it's a question of women versus men, because there's not going to be any real change. There isn't man change. But I know you don't mean that anyway. But I'm going to say, this panel is supposed to be about values, and somebody came up to me and said, you're reading a panel on family, isn't that right? And I said, no, it's about values, about retreat from equality and values generally. She said, well, someone said it was a family. Now, the reason for that is that the far right and the fundamentalists have almost preempted the word values to equate with the word family, and we all value families, but what they mean by family is, again, part of this doublespeak, is somehow some sense of traditional family, so-called traditional family values, where if you really care for families today and you propose, therefore, a parental leave legislation or child care for families where both parents of the single parent work, these are, in the name of family, you oppose things that are needed for family. Now, I dare to get around the spiritual realm and say that, this nation under God, this interesting thing that's happened, just as values have been preempted and family has been preempted and given absolutely reverse meaning. This is the highest values of creation, of what we hold sacred. To have the mainstream churches, I don't know what's happened to the mainstream churches, but the fundamentalist churches have taken that realm over, and in ways that to some of us seem almost obscene attack on values. And I put the question to you, Forrest. You're a minister, and where is your generation going to come with some leadership on spiritual values that will motivate the young again to social action?
Well, you put your finger exactly on the problem, Betty. They have stolen the march with the rhetoric, pro-life, pro-family. This is extremely powerful. When one listened to Oliver North this summer, one of the reasons he struck such a chord with the American people is that he used words such as love, faith, hope. He exemplified fortitude. He seemed in so many ways to be an emblem of that which we have lost and yet still most cherish. But we need to do somehow, and this may fall on the tide in the realm of new ideas, we need to stop being reactionary. I've agreed with almost everything that's been said over the past few days, but it sounded like a record that I've heard before. And it's a fond record. It's one of those records that one likes to put on every now and again because one knows it and loves it. But we are reactionary in our rhetoric. And therefore the people in the world, Tony, those white middle-class workers you were talking about who dropped away from the Democrats, those people respond to two things: the rhetoric of hope, which is the pro-family, pro-life rhetoric, and the rhetoric of fear, which is that in some way we represent perversion, various forms of perversion, eating away at the fabric of our time. Why is Alan Bloom's book a bestseller? It isn't being read, but it's being put on the shelf as a talisman for the old, good-fashioned values that are loved and lost. They see the word Plato and they melt. Now, what are we going to do about that? And I think what Amy has said is exactly right. What we need is a new language, a new set of gathering metaphors, and they come primarily from the feminist movement. And many of them will come, you'll find, as you look into this, from feminist theologians. First of all, the old virtues are competitive virtues as opposed to cooperative virtues. This is an interdependent age. This is an age in which, for the first time, protectionism doesn't protect. For the first time, other people's insecurity leads to our own insecurity, something that's been said again and again. Now, how do we convey that? One of the things we need to do is to help these people to understand that when their neighbors suffer, they suffer. When their neighbors are hungry, they will ultimately be famished. When their neighbors are endangered, they are endangered. And we have some new metaphors for this, and they're dramatic metaphors. The first is the metaphor of earthrise, taken from the moon, as we saw this beautiful blue-green planet, marbled with white clouds, rising as a single organism. From the studies of cell biologists, people such as Lewis Thomas, he has given us a new set of metaphors. The organic nature of all things. The fact, indeed, would be our family. Not family against family, but one family. One family together on one planet. That there is a kinship of all people. That is a new metaphor from science. Another new metaphor from science might come from the hologram. A hologram, as most of you know, is it's taken through a photoplate with so many different tiny little lenses. And it's done with lasers, two lasers, so you get a parallax vision, and you get a three-dimensional picture on the holograph. And if you shatter that plate into 1,000 pieces, you can take one shard or tiny sliver, and you can throw a laser through it, and you will get an ever so dim but completely three-dimensional representation of the whole. Or the body. Each one of us has coursing through our body cells and corpuscles that have our name written on them. That doesn't, it has my DNA. It doesn't know that it's Forest Church as it's charging through my veins, but it is. We don't know that we are related as profoundly as we are, but we are. These are tremendously powerful images. They're images taken as all the great images of time have been taken from contemporary science, contemporary technology. And then making up the enemy, which it so easily can become if it is employed in a competitive as opposed to cooperative way. If our virtues continue to be hierarchical as opposed to relational. Rather than doing that, let us take that and cap it. And then, since the opposite of love is not hated is fear, see whether we can come up with a hopeful vision that in some way inspires those people who are fragmented, divided, estranged, frightened, somehow inspires them to recognize the nature of their relationship with us, who are part of the body of God, if I can use that language, or the body of life, or the body of the earth. But what we've done, I remember in the Vietnam War period, I want to say one more thing. I remember when I was opposing the war, I was one of those people who saw the American flag on the lapel of the pro-war people. And so I turned that flag upside down. And I'm ashamed of that. I'm ashamed of it because it was my flag, and I think I was the patriot. But I let them take the flag away from me. And I don't want to let them take the family away from me. Or I don't want them to take life away from me, or from any of us. But neither do I want to take it away from them. And that's what we've got to find out somehow a new way to do. Thanks.
I think that now we'll take a 10-minute break, come back here in 10 minutes, And let us begin, then, the rest of this afternoon to address ourselves to the needs for positive vision and new kinds of activism, and so that tomorrow morning in our final plenary session, we may actually come up with a way to continue the spirit that has been generated by the Sag Harbor Initiative. Let's come to order for the afternoon session of the Sag Harbor Initiative. The second half of the session on values on the retreat for equality. Before we begin, I want to tell you that my colleague in organizing this panel, Pat Pickens, has to be given credit for what I think is a very well organized panel. And there are many students here from South African College, and we certainly welcome you as part of the rehearsal of the retreat. Let's see, for the discussion, I see over here on the mic on the left is Professor Wilson. Hugh Wilson from Adelphi College. He's Professor of Political Science, and he's done a lot of work on traffic planning, so I think he has something to say to us.
Okay, I'd just like to add a few points to those that have been made by the panel on the retreat from equality. Eleanor Holmes Norton touched on something very important, the lack of an institutional consensus. One of the reasons why we've had retreat from equality. There's only one decade, the 1960s, when we had both the bureaucracy, Congress, the presidency, and the courts working in harmony. All other decades have had this kind of disharmonious time. At present, the Congress remains the only branch of government that supports even vaguely the concept of equality. The concept is a very recent concept, and one cannot emphasize that enough. It is a very recent concept. It means that it is very fragile, very difficult to maintain. I'd like to add a couple of other reasons why I think there is a difficulty in maintaining equality. And some of these are what I call structural reasons. For example, America happens to be the most fragmented governmental system in the world. So that when, in 1954, we have Brown versus Board of Education, desegregation, theoretically, is ushered in. The problem then arises that we have to usher that into 16,000 individual school districts, each with their own individual power. So because of this nature of the way the government is structured, equality becomes 16,000 different struggles that one has to fight. The second issue I'd like to touch on is the issue of equality as particularistic. In most European countries, equality is considered a universal phenomenon. It's the responsibility of the government to ensure equality. That is done through universal programs. For example, things like family policy, national child care, national maternity leave policies, national children's allowances. The United States is the only industrialized nation without a national child care policy, without a national maternity leave policy, without national children's allowances. We're so individualistic that we see the individual. We do not see ourselves as a collectivity, but as individuals struggling on their own. And the last point I'd like to make is that one of the concepts that we cherish, unfortunately, is the concept of incrementalism. We do not believe in fundamental changes. So what happens is that when public policy is articulated, it's articulated in an incremental way. For those who struggle for equality, fundamentalism is the only answer. So what I think you have to address yourselves with are the structural impediments to equality. Thank you.
And I know you say that the limits of the concept equality can be if it's defined only in an instrumental way. I say that the women's movement in its second stage has to get beyond the male model of equality and have a model of equality that that integrates the values that have up to now been associated with the female, the values of caring and compassion and nurture and life. Robin, you wanted to say something?
Well, what I wanted to express, which will probably cause a lot of grief at this table, but I'm worried as I've listened to the bashing of the defense industry only on one basis, and that's this. These guys are order takers. You can ask Martin Marietta or Rockwell or General Dynamics to make something else. They are getting their instructions from our representation and the White House. And I think, again, we have to go back to that understanding of the political mechanism. That's where we have to take our case, and that's why in a group like this, you can communicate with your legislators, you can work through those means and run yourself, by the way, because this is something else too few Americans want to get into the system and run. It's full of high risk and I don't guess much money, but it's very important that we have a coming together. This was discussed. We're always beating the heads of the corporate leaders. There are an awful lot of people employed by major corporations in this country, and whether we like some of the things they do or not, and whether the defense policy we like or we don't like, we ought to have this sense of coalescence. We ought to be able not to keep sitting up here saying, down with this company and down with that. We ought to start talking about how can we have a dialogue with these people? Why can't we reach our legislators? Why can't we bring this thing together? We seem to define what's wrong, and I say we all ought to have some sense of building bridges to each other, even with some of our major disagreements. This is the only way, I can tell you, we were able to get the abortion law in place in 1973, is to kind of work and negotiate and not get everybody gnashing their teeth. They're gnashing their teeth now that we won, but in the process of getting this, there had to be a coming together, and I would just like to emphasize that.
Can we take them the male contraceptive problem and get them to work on that?
Well, I want to add on that male contraceptive problem. I think I know what is being discussed, and the pharmaceutical industries are terrified of it, but it is something that was developed by the Chinese, and there are side effects much more complicated for men than for women in the use of contraception. And I suppose
my point, Robin, was that you can't even get anywhere nearly the kind of grant money to even explore what the side effects might be. And I don't, I'm not saying that one example is the only kind of male contraception there is, but I do think that it is a frightful situation that we can do what we can technologically in our society at this time, and that women still have the total burden of controlling pregnancy. That was my point.
No, I didn't mean to agree with you. No, I agree with you, and it'd be a lot easier. Sterilization is the commonest form of contraception today in the United States, and it's a lot easier to have a vasectomy than for a woman to have a sterilization process. The option is always that it has to be a woman. Because
I see former Congressman Hal Waldron. Can we welcome you to the Sag Harbor Initiative, and we would love to hear some of your thoughts about the retreat from equality.
Thank you very much, Betty. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's always good to be in Sag Harbor. Normally when I'm here, I'm the rest in my corporation at the invitation of Billy and Pat Pickens, but today we're here for stimulation. I'd like to just allow myself to meander, if I may, some thoughts that I have related to work, related to what's happening politically, and related to the fact that our families, our ancestors, may have come over here on different ships, but we're all in the same boat since Reagan went to the White House. The most conservative element that I have been able to experience as an adult, and as someone who's been in elected office and political office, the governor all of my life, has occurred now. Let's speak to the issue momentarily of why there will be a debate on the Senate floor regarding pork. It's because the president and his minions have not given up in terms of the proselytizing of America towards their conservative persuasion. Someone who is a thoughtful person proposed by the president would have said, I don't want to cause you any further pain with this process. Let me step down graciously and thanks. But they've decided to go to the floor. And the fact that they've decided to go to the floor of the Senate means that they want to turn more Americans towards their policy. Let's speak momentarily of what that policy has done here in New York State, this ultra-conservative political element. One, there are 40,000 blacks in jail, in prisons right now. 40,000 people in jail at this moment. 78% of those are blacks. We're building prison cells to the tune of $125,000 per, and we're maintaining people in prison at $30,000 per. That money could better be spent if we were looking to prenatal care, if we were looking to pre-K education, if we were looking to education up to the third grade so that the children who are from the deprived and depressed areas would have an opportunity to realize their fullest potential. I fought the governor somewhat, I fought the mayor somewhat, but the real answer to all of these problems lies in Washington. We talked about our political operatives. As I came through the door, someone was speaking to, and I have big ears, and I heard the mediocrity of those who are in elected office. Well, that may be true, but if it is true, it is the fault of the electorate. The electorate must decide that we want someone who is not only reflective of our thoughts and our feelings, but replicative of us, and go out and do something about it. So I say to you who are here today that this coming together is extremely important. Not because it's here in Sag Harbor, but because this is a microcosm, in my opinion, of what must be done in America so that we can rid ourselves of the kind of albatross that the Reagan Administration has been, so that we can rid ourselves of the semblance of mediocrity that's caused some concern, so that we can say to our children and to our grandchildren, now that Bob and I have a grandchild, that there is hope, that America can do all that it should do for all of its people, black folk and white folk, but only if we get involved. Thank you very much.
Facilitator of the Food for Minority Student Union. And Sag Harbor.
What are you doing?
Kind of nervous. The Sag Harbor Initiative, I got so much out of this, it's overwhelmingly. It overwhelms me. I'm going to bring it back to our club and express some of the ideas I learned here today. I've seen some of the positive black role models in which it's really a reality to me now because you don't see many. Our role models in neighborhoods like where I come from are the drug dealers because we don't have people like Patricia, Bill Pickens, Archie Sam, and Bruce Llewellyn. So to say it made me feel so good, you know what I mean? It brought some kind of something to my body. What we want to know is will there be committees like this formed in any sense that you can, and me as a student can get on these committees and be a part of, go through our neighborhoods, our high schools, our recreations, and things like that, and show our young youth, minority, Hispanic, show them that there is a reality, a right way to do things. There is a reality. You don't have to look up to the drug dealers. There are people like this around as good people. And this is what keeps me going. This is what keeps we are talking about, humanities and getting along with each other, but it's not the same when you can form a white panel to go into a lower middle class neighborhood and say, you can be this, you can be that. It's not the same feeling as a Bill Pickens or Archie Singham coming to me and saying, you can't do this. I have the 8th largest Coca-Cola company in the world or the country. Something like that is like, wow, it's a reality. It's a reality to me now. It's a reality. It's tough. I'm going to bring it back to the NYU Southampton campus and show them there is a way out.
That was probably one of the best reasons we could have for being here today.
I'm David Thorne, and I live in Sag Harbor. I'm a retired United Nations official, an African voluntary expatriate, voluntary settled in Sag Harbor. I'd like to address just briefly some of the points about inequality. I see in the program the question whether America's values and the reflection
spectrum of its economic and political conditions. I would rather take the problem to its source. Every people is a victim of their own mythology. And the mythology to which the people in America, as in Western Europe, are victims is the mythology, the Greco-Roman, Judeo-Christian Islamic mythology. Racism is not an accident, nor is racial discrimination, nor is inequality of the sexes. Racism was propagandized by an ancient Greek aristocrat, an illegitimate aristocrat called Plato, whose philosophy has been the basis of Western education. Plato believed that non-Greeks should be slaves, and women and slaves should not be part of the community. This is the kind of mythology on which the United States was founded. Blacks and women were not included in the situation. And this is how we are victim to an ancient Greek mythology, which we have to examine. It's not an accident. Now, black racism is also not an accident. It is a legacy of the Judeo-Christian Islamic literature, specifically from the book of Genesis. The myth of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Ham being the representative of black people who should be slaves to the rest of humanity. Now, why? Because there was an old fellow called Noah who took it into his head to get drunk and expose himself. And the king who found out he was drunk was victimized because he told his girl that he went and covered him up. Now, this you may not be aware, or you may be aware of it, but this is the mythology. And it is on this basis that the blacks in South Africa and the white Afrikaners in South Africa base themselves. They quote scripture as the basis for exploiting black people in Africa. Now, inequality of women. This also is not an accident. We have the myth of women being made from the rib of Adam. By implication, they are inferior. Now, of course, the men think they are superior. I agree, but provided the time comes when a man will no longer be born of a woman. Finally, but lest you think I'm a feminist, I'm not a feminist. I'm just saying it like it is, as the saying goes. But you have to blame the women partly for it, because they acquiesce in this kind of a situation by the way they bring up their male children and by the way they treat their husbands. The boys are brought up, or typically, they are brought up in a cultural milieu to serve their men. They must take care of their homes, their husbands, and so on. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but the boys are not brought up the same way to take care of their wives and their children. And the men, of course, are regarded as just grown-up boys who should be indulged, when the girl is a grown-up boy from that. And if men continue to be irresponsible to women, this is part of it, and the women are to blame for it. Now let's look at this mythology. There's nothing empirical which says that black people are inferior to white people. It is not empirical. But once you believe in the myth, you try to implement it and make it self-fulfilling. This is why every effort has been made to nullify, for example, the 14th Amendment in America. Because people still believe in the myth, consciously or unconsciously. There's nothing which says women are inferior to men. But if people believe it, they try to implement it. And anything that women do to get out of it, the men will try to nullify it. So let us go back to our mythology and see if we can change that mythology. We are not obliged to take something from 2,000, 3,000 years ago, which we know is not true. Thank you.
I think the remarks of our brother from Africa are very welcome in helping us to invigorate our self-inspection on these questions of gender and race equality. Allow me to say, in partial reply though, that my own first direct expression, felt receipt of racism was traveling as a young Fulbright student in one of the Confucian countries, I will not identify which one, and walking in a back street, surrounded suddenly by adolescents pointing at me and saying, "Tapitsu, tapitsu," which means, long-nosed one. And I felt alien, and I felt identified as a long-nosed white. And it would be hard to shake me in my placid conviction at this point that there is latent racism almost anywhere in the world. As president of Eisenhower Fellowships, we have fellows in 95 countries. I've never had, we've had a lot of disclosures of racial situations in other nations and gender situations in other nations that illuminate the human condition and not just an American one. In any case, we still have plenty of self-inspection to do, and we're not totally without resources in our own tradition. I think the Socratic element in our tradition is a good one when it comes to examining myth, precisely what our brother reminded us sometimes gets out of our control, is racial myths and other kinds. The greatest anti-mythologist, I think, in our tradition is Socrates, and we can go back to him and ask the right questions.
Let me comment, because I think this whole business about myths is something that we ought to deal with right here and now. This is the 200th anniversary of the Constitution. President Marshall gave a speech last May where he said that we shouldn't be so joyous about the Constitution that it was created. We should be joyous that it managed to survive all the effects on what the Constitution was supposed to stand for. Recall, the Constitution perpetuated slavery, gave no right to women, and did not protect workers. Yet these are the things that we talk about that we revere. And I think the problem with those of us in the upper strata is that we really believe that foolishness. We really believe that the Constitution protects our rights. And the fact that Robert Bork, with his arrogant self, got up there and said some of the things that he said, began to get some people thinking about what the Constitution is about and what equality is about. And the fact that the reason why Robert Bork is going to be defeated isn't the efforts of Betty and some of the rest of us who worked on this in the intellectual community, is because a certain number of Southern white senators who were elected by predominantly black voters who was a swing vote decided that they couldn't have Robert Bork because they wouldn't be back in Congress. We've got to face some of the realities of our own elitism and racism and classism. A classic example of that is an attitude that has been taken by many people, maybe some in this audience, about Jesse Jackson's candidacy for president. He's not a serious candidate. I might ask, why isn't he a serious candidate?
If I may tie in what Roscoe said to the comment on mythology, obviously myths are powerful, but there is no way we can escape them. No people ever have escaped the power of myth. Every myth has a dark side and a light side. The Bible is filled with stories that liberate. Stories such as the Exodus narrative, which has been the heart of almost every liberation movement in the West, right there. That's a powerful story. There's something else. The Constitution, of course, was not perfect upon being founded. It's not intended to be a perfect document, but it had the seed within it, words like equality, that we could build on and use to our own, in our own halting way, to protect as best we can our own society. The battle over slavery was fought on the Bible. Those people who were defending slavery and those people who were opposing. The document has that kind of multi-valence. There's no question about it. Now, all I'm asking is, what can we do reaching out to the people of this country who are primarily inspired by things such as the mythos of the Constitution and the mythos of the Bible, Constitution is flawed, and they won't hear another word we have to say, or we can say that the Bible and the Constitution both inspire us to be who we are and to do what we're doing. And there's so much powerful evidence in both of those documents that we can tap and we can say the American thing to do and the religious thing to do is what we're doing right here. Until we have a way to translate our own values and beliefs into the larger the field of discourse, we're just not going to get anywhere.
I think also I want to say this. I really, I want to say on behalf of women, and I can speak for a lot of women, that I don't buy the notion that the Constitution is foolishness as far as women are concerned. The Constitution was not originally written for the people that were women. They were not recognized as full people. But its concepts of equality, the concepts of freedom of speech, the concepts of the right to organize and the amendments of the Constitution, without those there would have been no women's movement. Without those, we could not have organized to a point where the president of women is now accepted, and we are going to sooner or later amend the Constitution to say that it absolutely must apply to women. And the beauty of the Constitution has been the ability for Americans to make it evolve. And the beauty of the Judeo-Christian tradition, too, is the women theologians, women rabbis, women ministers are giving the most wonderful new spirit to spiritual values because they are putting into what has been defined only in male terms, the woman as full person. And so I think that all of this power has made us to both better think about our own Constitution and what its values really are and what we want to continue to evolve. And that was what the people said, not only to federal senators, but to urban Republican senators, the right to privacy is something that the American people will not go back on.
I do want to say something about the constitutional myth. Thurgood Marshall did a great service to the country, and Thurgood Marshall did a great service to the country in reminding it that revisionist history is very un-American and reminding us of the evolution of our own Constitution. But it is very important that myths not be associated only with negative aspects of American life. No society continues to grow without its own powerful myths. One of the only remaining powerful myths in American society, with all of our diversity, is the myth of the Constitution. The myth that all of us somehow have brought in, whatever our religious or ethnic or political background, into that wonderful, powerful myth. The fact that myth has not always been real or true is quite beside the point. The myth of God is true for those who believe in God. Even when there is war and famine and pestilence, it is the myth that makes people live through the pestilence so that they can indeed live full lives once again. The myth of the Constitution is in a very real sense the handiwork of black people who enjoyed its least when there was nothing but racism. They believed those words. Because they believed them, they ultimately made them live. Black people, therefore, have to be at the forefront of those who celebrate the Constitution, not because it is perfect, but because they have made it more perfect. One of the worst things we could do in a time when so little brings us together is to try to debunk or destroy the one powerful myth that continues to animate the society, the myth of the great American Constitution, which has been copied all over the world and which continues to drive us to a more perfect society.
I'm going to question for Robin Duke or perhaps others. Most of the problems that we are thinking here are current and critical, but there are some broad historical sweep
challenge our ideals too. I was thinking that the most important unspoken word of the weekend probably is the word overpopulation. We've gone from a world of 2 billion people when I was in high school to 5 billion today. By the end of this century, it will be 6 billion. 20 years later, it will be 8 billion. In this country, where we feel a little insulated from those figures, we nevertheless jumped from 2.2 million people between May 1st to 87 to 86, May 1st, 87. We know that the present administration has scuttled family planning programs pretty effectively around the world. So I have, what would you like to say about that in terms of, A, what we can do about the problem practically, but also what does all this mean in terms of hunger, in terms of jobs, in terms of education, in terms of family, and ultimately in terms of human values and our spirit?
Well, I suppose this administration's policy has done more to scuttle the population programs that were in place and are in place still with other nations around the world. We defunded the United Nations Fund for Population because we said the Chinese had a coercive policy. All the money we gave to China was entirely to help them get their arms around their population problem, have census taking, and to implement timely planning. So I would say that this administration has no grasp of the seriousness of the degradation of the forests, the wetlands, all the various byproducts of too many people on too small a planet with too little resources. And what population people have been trying to do and what the U.S. government has been trying to do as a good neighbor to third world nations is to say, limit the number, and then there's a better chance for education, a decent quality of life, a chance for a job, housing, and an opportunity to see some economic growth. And that policy was in place to support agencies that would do that kind of work in the third world. We now have reduced that funding. We've reduced it in areas where it's very serious, and we've reduced it for reasons that are absolutely ludicrous. One of the most outrageous in the Title X is that we've said to Planned Parenthood affiliates in the world community, if you even make a referral to a poor woman in Dhaka, Bangladesh, who comes to you and says, well, I'm now pregnant for the 7th time and I'd like to get an abortion. If you referred that woman to an abortion clinic, you would be defunded immediately by the U.S. policy that Jesse Helms is very carefully orchestrating. I could enumerate for quite a long time here about agencies that have been doing good works and have been defunded. I can only say it will just result in more people, more resources going down the drain, more forest lands being chopped down, and it's a poor policy that the U.S. has adopted at this time. And it's a tragedy because it isn't serving the best interests of really poor people around the world.
My name is Tom Warner from Sag Harbor. I think it's great you have this here. What I'd like to ask about is I'm kind of pessimistic on if this will take off like you want it to, simply because if you align yourself so completely and 100% with the Democratic Party, I'm raised a Democrat since I was 18, and when I see polls that 90% of the people, let's say black people, voted for Mondale or voted for whoever, and if politicians act in their own self-interest, which I believe they do, Democrats know they'll never lose you, Republicans know they'll never win you. So why should they do anything for you when you're there? And I think at a local level you have to work with Republicans that are accessible, because the two-party system has been around almost as long as the Constitution has, even though it's not mentioned there. And if we continue as we go with just giving I think the people that vote are smarter than you think. They vote in Republicans sometimes to keep the Congress in check, and then they vote the Congress over Democratic to keep the president in check. They're smarter than you think. And you take it on a New York State level. New York City was always the tail wagging the dog, and New York State, the rest of it, always organized and made it all Republican to try and balance it somehow. And it happens, Long Island's changing because of
mind that there may be a slightly wrong impression. This Sag Harbor Initiative is by no means a byproduct of the Democratic Party. If you listen carefully, you would have heard that a lot of us, myself included, are extremely critical of the retreat from values of the leadership of the Democratic Party. And we hope they will listen to this. We are, of course, almost all of us, I would say, very critical indeed of the people that would nominated Bork and that aspect of the Constitution and many of the policies of the Reagan Administration. But we are not, we haven't enjoyed the language of war against Republicans or anything like that. This is Tony who did say something that might have given the impression that he hasn't been to most of the meetings because he didn't get into his house to be. Your point is well taken. There are not all Democrats and Democratic leadership reflects the thinking of this group, and our thinking, I think we want to motivate ourselves to move in new directions, and we can't control, but we may possibly influence also some thinking of the political parties.
That is, as one whose father voted for Herbert Hoover, let me say that there's been a long tradition of black involvement in the Republican Party, and basically those changes occurred as a result of the effort of Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. I think it's instructive, and one of the most eloquent spokesmen against Robert Bork was Senator Alan Specter from Pennsylvania, a Republican. If any of you didn't read his piece in Friday's New York Times indicating why he voted against Bork, I commend it to you because it's one of the most outstanding pieces of senatorial wisdom that I've read, and he's a Republican.
Another point that I just may make is the leader for us in this whole effort was Bob Packwood, a Republican from Oregon, who's been carrying all the heavy water on this whole abortion question for a very long time. So there are two Republicans. There are a few more.
My name is Stanley Rothman. My wife and I live in Woodmere, New York, and we also have a residence in Southampton. First I want to say is I love America. And I want to publicly announce that I'm not running a public office. But where else in America can a kid from Brooklyn, namely me, have a house in Woodmere and also have a residence in Southampton? What I'm trying to say is, in essence, this is the greatest country in the world. Anyone can achieve what they want to achieve as long as their goal is realistic. That's my statement. Now my question, and I'll certainly keep it under a minute. I would like to address this to Reverend Church. What effect do you think the fundamentalist evangelical movement will have on the fiber of America presently and in the future?
Let me just backtrack one step, and I'll very briefly answer that. Realism is an interesting word. We're redefining words today. The people who consider themselves to be realists, I think, hard-headed realists, happen to be the same people who are sponsoring SDI, which is the most idealistic in the sense of comic book caricature of science and reality that I've ever seen. Now, they talk to themselves as realists. In this day and age, the realists are the old idealists. We're sitting right here. We're a bunch of realists in this room. We know that while you have your two houses and things are getting better for you, and we're not going to take them away from you, we know that at the same time, if the distance between you and some of your old neighbors in the Bronx gets very much larger, Brooklyn, I'm sorry about that. Brooklyn, mainly Bed-Stuy, well, that's just fine. That's just perfect. Thank you for that correction. But if it gets any worse, the fundamentalists aren't going to be anything compared to what we're going to see between the rich and the poor in this country. There are two parties in this country. It's the rich and the poor, basically. There are two parties in the world. And of a study from history. Choose your enemies carefully because you will become like them. And if we make fundamentalists our enemy, rather than some of the things they stand for as our enemy, then we will become like them, and the folks won't have much to choose between in looking at those of us.
My name is Theodore, and I have no academic or political qualifications. Except that I did get a good education throughout, as I remember, at law school. There are three short points I would like to make because there are a lot of people who want to talk, and I'll make it quite brief. First is this problem of equality of education. I think that's a very important concept. But if the E were dropped off that, I think it would be even more important, namely quality of education. Those people to whom Kurt Vonnegut spoke at MIT and Carnegie were pretty well educated. They had all the degrees that anybody would want, and they were, I am sure, by and large, as, or maybe even a little more, reactionary, racist, sexist than most of our population is. People with all sorts of educational advantages have gone very far, even getting to the point where they become president of the United States or justices, or potential justices of the United States Supreme Court. So equality of education is very, very hard to achieve. But quality of education is, I think, going to be even harder to achieve. And that remark was made this morning, it isn't my own idea. But what is taught is perhaps even more important than who is taught. Because education by itself can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. Number two, I think one of the most interesting things about this panel was that everybody perceived the problem as a political problem. Not a moral problem or an ethical problem, but a political problem. And it is a political problem. And I think that while I agree with almost everything everybody said, I don't want to get into a debate about the Constitution because that would be counterproductive. But generally speaking, I agree with what everybody said, but I agree most with what Professor Acioli said, and unfortunately he's gone. Because it seems to me that the critical problem is not what to do. I don't think there's been too much argument among us, either here or this morning's panel, where there was a little more diversity of opinion. It isn't what to do, it's how to do it. That's the problem. And since we've all recognized at this panel, and I think most of the people this morning, that the problem is a political problem, not an economic problem. A political problem that political action is necessary. Now, I thought originally that was a dirty word until I heard it mentioned up here by others, so maybe it's not so dirty. And it may very well be political organization. And it may very well be non-democratic and non-republican political organization, because I share with what a previous speaker said, I don't have much faith in Sam Nunn, and I don't have much faith in Senator Byrd and other great Democrats, nor even in Mondale, for that matter. I think some of these other fellows are pretty good, but I'm not talking about individuals like Cuomo and Jackson and Dukakis. I'm talking about an organization. And as an organization, I really don't see the Democratic Party advancing very far or very boldly on any of the paths that we had outlined here. I don't know how to do this. And that brings me, in a sense, to my third point. When I was discussing this whole project and describing it to a friend of mine who was 18 years old, he said to me, how many people are there on this panel under 30? And I thought for a minute, and I said, well, I don't know. anybody who's under 30. I'm glad you make it. That's good. He said, well, I said, how many under 40? Well, at this point, I figured you would have to have an embarrassing questionnaire passed around. I didn't see any point in that. And, of course, when I told him that I couldn't name anybody, even under 40 who was on this panel, he turned up his nose and walked away, so to speak. And what that young man from Southampton said, it seems to me, is critical. If I have any criticism at all of this whole initiative, and I really think it's been wonderful, it would be that this 20-year-old, 30-year-old group was not sufficiently heard from and is not sufficiently in the audience. I remember a militant, strong, progressive trade union movement in the 40s and 50s that was led by 26, 27, 28, 30-year-old men. And they built a great, big, powerful movement, which unfortunately hasn't survived, but that wasn't their fault. At least I don't think it was. And I really think that the young people have a great deal to say to us. And it is to them that the baton has to be passed, shall I say. I'm not speaking to everybody on that platform, but I'm speaking to myself. In order to carry this fight on, and unless we hear from them and consult with them, we're not going to get very far.
First, I want to say thank you to the inspirational, visionary originators of the Sag Harbor Initiative, Betty and William, Pat, Bill, and everyone else. You're extraordinary people. My name is Diana Maria Isola. I'm a daughter of immigrant parents. I am a mother of two outstanding sons, single parent, and also an educator in education since 1964. And I feel very much that the Sag Harbor Initiative is the possibility of bringing forth a dream, and that is that we form a participatory, collaborative group of citizens to design a first-class educational model for the child. At the end of the month in Washington, there will be a business education conference, and that means that the business community is just very eager to participate in the formulation of a better education for children. Each child is entitled to a first-class education and nothing less than that. Now, it's been difficult for educators, and I'll tell you why education has failed. Because, for the most part, if we examine those classrooms, what we see are 25 to 30 children in the classroom with one teacher who has a full-time job alone taking care of paperwork. Okay, children who are victims of today's society, and their parents also, unfortunately, victims of today's society. So what that says to us is that we are now really, we have to see ourselves as a global family, okay, putting forth the support systems necessary to give each child of the future a first-class education, because they are our future. And we now have the opportunity to put our brain power and our vast education has failed. Because, for the most part, if we examine those classrooms, what we see are 25 to 30 children in the classroom with one teacher who has a full-time job alone taking care of paperwork. Okay, children who are victims of today's society, and their parents also, unfortunately, victims of today's society. So what that says to us is that we are now really, we have to see ourselves as a global family, okay, putting forth the support systems necessary to give each child of the future a first-class education, because they are our future. And we now have the opportunity to put our brain power and our vast experiences and knowledges together for that opportunity. We have to collaborate. We need each other. I'm Cynthia Epstein. I'm a sociologist and a professor at the City University Graduate Center. And from time to time, I've been activated to march.
was in the 60s when we marched various places to establish women's rights. And several years ago, in a meeting in Jerusalem, at the end of the meeting discussing women's rights in the two countries, the United States and Israel, the end of the session was marked by a march led by Betty to a meeting between Shamir and Perez. And on the spot, there was a development of something called the Women's Lobby. Well, I thought about this as Amitai Etzioni was challenged by Betty to remark on the active society and what we could do. And as a sociologist, I look at these issues not from a single factor view, but we've been educated to look at these issues from a multi-factor approach. And people here have discussed two facets of these issues, the ideological and the structural. Some people put the economy as being something we have to tend to before we do anything else. Other people have spoken to mythology in American society that motivates or restrains people. Well, I'm suggesting we have to approach this from both perspectives and indeed not permit the issues that have come up to become the sign to the proprietorship of particular sectors, which I think what happened in this whole discussion of special interests. And so I inquire of your thinking of the genesis of an idea here, which is that we have to think, each of us, about what we shall do independently, as Etzioni suggested, and I was inspired by the notion of the oath that fell flat at MIT for the scientists, but perhaps we can take an oath here, we social scientists, writers, philosophers, theologians, that when we leave here, we will do something specifically ourselves, we will act, we will write if that's our forte, or if it's lobbying, we will do that. We will do it not only on our issue, the one that we have become specialized in, but we will do it on other issues. Let's have the economists write about abortion. Let's have the civil rights activists write about women's rights. Let us all take up the cudgel for those issues that we agree upon collectively, in spite of our own specialities, not to leave them alone, and that we should perhaps, from time to time, come together. The young man who spoke from Southampton College, I think, was an inspiration to all of us. I think we should now form groups that go around, talk. We could follow Betty, perhaps, I don't know where we would go when we march out of here today. But at least symbolically, there's the ocean and the sky and a new horizon. And I think that we have together set that initiative at work, and we should view it not as a just philosophical exercise, but an actual practical set of challenges.
To respond to a couple of things. First, I think I owe Betty an apology, and I owe my initiators an apology for if I meant anybody to think that this was a part of the Democratic Party's campaign. Clearly it is not. I, for one, am a Democrat. I, for one, think that part of what has happened through American politics of late has been an unfortunate withering away of the political party. And I, for one, do not have dissuade those conservative Southern senators. In fact, but also, it seems to me there was the germ of a national consensus. Just the germ, developing that. And I was also a germ that courts simply did not speak for most Americans' views of the constitutional process. And one more point. I was very struck by something that Clay Becker said the first day, responding to Norman Podhoretz's notion of war, and the notion that we indeed are at war, because we have started getting some very warlike rhetoric out of the president. That snap of the president from the CNN interview the other day that over my dead body. I think we would make a terrible mistake if we concluded that warlike rhetoric from the White House means that we are about, and I have great respect for Vonnegut, I don't think we are about to bear the un-American or the evil of Nazis. And I think, quite on the contrary, these warlike signs from the White House indicate that we are on the cusp of something new. I think the conservative majority is waning rapidly, whether it coalesces around a progressive candidate, the Democratic Party, or the Republican Party. I really fundamentally doesn't matter. One final illustration of that. So several years ago, I went out to Denver to write about the death of Ellen Burr, the talk show host who was killed by, it is not clear, killed by neo-Nazis. There was a great deal of talk at that time about the revival of the neo-Nazi movement in this country. And I remember going to see a high police official in Denver who's been coordinating some of the attack on the neo-Nazis. And I said, indeed, are we at this, I had difficulty clearing it, right? Are we at the start of a neo-Nazi movement in the Western states? And he said, no, we are not. The assassination of Burr, the robbery of several banks in the Northwest, the holdups of several armored cars, was evidence of precisely the opposite. The inability of the neo-Nazis to gather any strength in the Western United States, and they were driven to acts of desperation. I suggest to you now that Ronald Reagan's snapping over my dead body from the White House is the most dramatic evidence that he knows and his fellow and his supporters in the White House know that the conservative, the Reagan Revolution has about run its course. And that is why the talk of coming together, the talk of hope here this weekend, I think is entirely appropriate.
I've been written out of the historical profession. I didn't say one word about the Constitution. The Constitution is not a myth. It's an historic document. It evolves out of American history, out of struggles between interests, which are not terrible things, between property people, unproperty people, blacks for rights, women for rights. And that's why it's so significant now that the struggle around the Constitution is going in a way that we all want to see it go. We have to criticize the Constitution because I have to be aware of its strengths. But if you want to reflect our history as an historian, I'm just going to say that.
My name is Richard Cummings. I'm a co-leader of a person who wanted to see the Forest Church. Having the flag upside down is not a symbol of disrespect, it's a notable symbol of distress. It's appropriate to be upside down. Secondly, on your point of the Constitution, I want to base this on our whole order. The post-book response to the next nominee. Will it not be more significant to wonder if that nominee is going to be a person who might not be so hostile to Roe v. Wade, but is perfectly prepared to overrule Garcia versus San Antonio, so that the far-right standard back will no longer be applicable to the states? I think in the next round of questioning, perhaps even more subtlety will have to be influenced to make sure that kind of legacy of the Reagan Revolution is not perpetuated. Thank you.
As we look beyond the book in terms of our own issues. I'm reminded about Lewis Powell when he was nominated to the Supreme Court, and how lots of people were set to oppose him. He and Edgar Cohen, lawyers in Washington, realized that there were in Powell's background. He had been head of the Board of Education in Virginia during massive resistance, and while not claiming liberal, had steered a steady course and been part of the lawyers program that brought quality services to the poor. And of course, now we're fighting because now we make another pill. Tony Lucas's notion about coalition needs, I think, to be stressed as a part of all of this. Even as you can't break the Constitution down into your particular issues, when a nominee comes out, you got to recognize, it seems to me, that the way in which this country operates, the way in which political success becomes possible, is through the working of coalitions. Each party is a set of coalitions. The Republican Party is in the process of forgetting that as the new right takes it over. And the Democrat, I agree with Tony that the Democratic Party coalition has splintered apart, and thus we have not been able to hold together the progressive fusion that produced, frankly, the great civil rights gains, particularly the legislative gains of the 1960s. Until we put Humpty Dumpty together again, and I could not agree more, that Humpty Dumpty includes the white working class, who are workers, like the people who at least I identify mostly with in my own community. Until we put that together again, we will not be able to muster the strength to get progressive action in the country again. And it really does mean what Cynthia Epstein said, understanding that if you work only for your issue, and that is all that you will get if you get that. And that somehow it means embracing the subtlety and the skill not only to work for other people's issues as well, but to understand that you cannot always get 100% of your issue, and yet you are still a part of the coalition. Once that splintering takes place sufficiently, once there is not the leadership to hold the working class with the intellectuals, with the minorities, with the progressive forces in the society, then none of the aims get recognized. Once we all have to have it all on our issue right now, or you are a fake. Once the analog to heroes or demons, and those demons turn out to be our allies in our own coalition, then what we have done is spent away the coalition upon which everything has depended on up until now. The civil rights legislation of the 1960s, ladies and gentlemen, was not a product of black lobbying. The civil rights legislation of the 1960s occurred at a time when Clarence Mitchell, the great lobbyist for the NAACP, was almost alone among blacks lobbying, doing what he could. There were no women lobbying for the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Betty Friedan was just waking women up to the fact that they did not enjoy equality. John F. Kennedy wanted to send the 64 Act to the Congress without Title VII, the very guts of it, because he said these people will never enact a law that puts employers under the government for any reason. It was, of all people, the American labor movement, which at that time contained the craft unions, which were indeed the seat of much of the racism in the workplace. It was the AFL-CIO that said, send it forward. We can't deal with racism in the labor movement either without an umbrella law that does so. And they provided the troops and the power that is responsible for the 64 Act. And then it was down on a roll, and you got the 65 Act, and you got the Voting Rights Act, and the 68 Fair Deal what's going on.
And the part of the urgency that was communicated by Kurt, too. It isn't finished yet. We probably have more, but it isn't finished yet. And desperate reaction that is no longer controlling the government law will finalize. It was very important that this note, the hour note, for instance, that anything that tries to divide, that really divide makes us single issue.
Betty, I was thinking, as Eleanor was talking, we have those three pillars of the Constitution: liberty, equality, and the pursuit of happiness. And it was what really intended that way by Jefferson. The notion of pursuit of happiness has always been taken as a kind of redundancy to liberty. It's been an individualistic pursuit. But in an independent way, when our own happiness is in part hinges upon other people's happiness, but we cannot be happy alone, we can only be happy together. The pursuit of happiness pillar becomes community. So you have liberty, equality, and community as the three pillars of the Constitution. Community is the seed or the germ of hope in this country. And if we can take what we've done here this weekend, go back into our communities, and then reconvene in ways, and I'm sure the steering committee and others of you will suggest as the weeks go by, we may be able to build from this a new and even richer and more diverse community, wherein we will discover that our own happiness is dependent upon others, that good is a community property, a shared possession, not an individual possession. And then we'll find ways as we listen to others and concern ourselves with their happiness to be able to speak more clearly of our own needs and concerns. And that would be the beginning of a new coalition of hope.
My name is Joanna Grossman. I'm a year-round resident of East Hampton. And I think this conference has been absolutely sensational in the sense that it is attempted to reclaim some kind of progressive high ground and a better name for radicalism. And I do think that it ought to be held in mind that it is very important to bridge the gaps. The lady who spoke before me asked from where we might march to where we might march from here. I might say Washington on this November 13th might be a good place to start to cement bridging the gaps that we try to start bridging here today. I think the military-industrial complex, as it is embodied in the nuclear industry, touches all of the concerns that were brought up today. It touches the poor, it touches who have to pay for the power, it touches black people and minority people who are cannon fodder for the military industry. It touches women whose aims are denied by the military-industrial complex. And I think it would be a symbolic gesture in the best sense and an active gesture in the best sense for everyone here to try and get there on November 13th.
Conversation over at 5:15. I think Theodore now might possibly get a chance to each repeat very brief and remind you that we will be convening for the final plenary session to discuss what we're going to do next or after or what we want to come out of this at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Let's try to be brief.
Thank you. My name is Michael Foyle. I teach economics at Stony and I came here today from the North Fork of Long Island, where there is also an issue in this matter. I want to say a couple of things about the issues of the working class which have been discussed here. In my experience with students and with other people in talking about classes in American society, it's not so much that they don't believe they exist, but that they think there's the rich, there's the middle class, and then there's the poor. That's the classes that are understood in this society. Rich means the few people who have all the money. Poor means all minorities. Middle class is almost like people who aren't minorities and who don't have all the money. And that really is what's largely the working in a class because of how much money you have, or what color you are somehow. It's your own characteristics. Rather than understanding what I think we need to see, classes are relations. People are in a class in a relationship to other people. So that in particular, workers are in a relationship with bosses. And I think that there are two points that come out of trying to understand classes as relations and seeing ourselves involved in relations in society. One is this question of community. That we are, in fact, a community. We do, in fact, enter into relationships with one another. And they're not just simply individuals who happen to be collected in one community. And we just go out on our own, looking out for number one, and somehow the whole society will turn out the best for it. That simply isn't true. Now, because we have a community, because we are in relationships, that means that our response to poverty, our response and our reaching to the working class, can't have the character of charity. Well, let's do something for the poor. And it can't have the character of fear, which is, oh, they're out there, and if we don't do something for them, then it will be bad. Which there's been a lot of fear exposed. There's an overcome of fear. I think that what we need in the quest for equality among people, in this coalition between whites and blacks, between working class and among us who want to work with that, is not an understanding of we better do something for charity, but an understanding that we are, in fact, a collective community which has a responsibility to one another through which we as individuals become people. And that isn't something that's true out of fear. It isn't something that we embrace out of charity and out of the goodness of our hearts. It is what we do as human beings. And if we can build our politics on the basis of that, I think we'll have something to say to people that can touch them. Because if we address them on fear, Ronald Reagan can do that too. And we'll lose to Ronald Reagan on those grounds. We can only do it by shifting the terms to what is truly uniting us. Now, in that regard, I would like to raise a question to Mr. Peterson from this morning's panel, who offered us, from his heights of Wall Street, a portion of his pension. I would say that it's insufficient to offer to us, to the solution of our problems, a portion of the pensions of the rich. I think what we need to do is to claim control over the capital of the rich, which comes out of a relationship with the poor, the working people, and the minorities and the women who make that wealth, which is in the possession of Mr. Peterson and his friends. And I think we should not rest with a portion of the pension, but seek the control over that capital which we have created as a social entity. And until we can control that democratically, we haven't done our job. We haven't addressed the terms of it. And of course, capital will resist it mightily. They resist it even to go from 1 acre to 2 acre zoning. How can you hear about property rights and property rights? But we know that there are limits that the community can put on capital. And if we can put limits on capital in our communities around zoning, why can't we put limits on capital over whether they take our jobs away from us, whether they discriminate against us, and whether they drive our communities into the dirt? That's the kind of orientation that I would like to see this group come up with. And I think that there will be a receptive ear for it throughout the country. Thanks so much.
My name is Charles Hutchin. I'm over 70, so I guess I can't qualify as a youngster. My background is in the social sciences, and I enjoy and applaud the emphasis on values as the focus of this discussion. In fact, as preparation for coming here, I went back and I didn't read Betty Friedan's first book, but I read that years ago, but I read the second stage. And it's very significant to me that in her first book, she was dealing with self-realization, essentially. to the symbolism of the Constitution and community. I must say, my perception of community is quite at odds with what I just heard Michael Slide saying, that we all have communities. In this big, impersonal, cosmopolitan world, you have subject in this book, The Different Drum, seeking to restore community. We don't have community in a realistic sense whether we get to know people as individuals. We deal with them in its own way. Part of the reason for this is that we live in the context of an individualist culture that has, as Ms. Friedan said, has its roots in the Enlightenment, with its emphasis on rights and on conquering nature, and that included women, slaves. We need to disenthron ourselves, to quote a famous person. We need to think through these basic questions, not take the Constitution as a myth that we have to worship. We have to. The Constitution was first used for the 14th Amendment to protect the rights of corporations, not slaves. I don't know if Holmes knows that very well, or Holmes knows that very well, and therefore our lives are live in a structure in which much more attention is paid to freedom of enterprise than it is to community. And yet, I feel it's only through restoring some minutes of the semblance of community, knowing people as individuals, that we will be able to make these values really live, be meaningful. I would just take, if I could, one quick minute. We all reported on this young black man who spoke of how he was inspired by Bruce Llewellyn, and I was too. But I would be despondent if I thought this young black man went and tried to make it into the middle class, the black middle class, rather than to consider, let's say, another example we have. We have a book that's been published for some time now by Mark Mazzafani, a man who emerged out of Johannesburg ghetto. And he, in this book, County Boy, one of the first things he done after having made some money from this book was to bring his family over from South Africa. That emphasis on caring, community, not making it as an individual, it's very important. I don't think we ought to lose sight of that. In other words, we do need a value revolution in this culture. We haven't got all the answers. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Joel Dees. I want to coach some concerned physicians who will do examination of migrant farmers up in Riverhead, which is a form of slavery today. If you want to know the full impact of the Constitution protecting them, you must read the matter of call by Judge Reagan. What do? You stress a group of people and then offer them reality and light. You cannot take the American Indian and revamp them in your own. If you take, when I was in medical school, Hans Selye came to the school, he was talking about stress, how the Nobel Prize for stress. And he said, if you take a rat, you put him in a bottle of water, he'll swim all day. When you take that rat and you put him in your hand, you hold him. And then put him in a bottle of water, he'll sink to the bottom. I'm good because he lost his will. Just think about the masses of black people. And I'm not there with the masses of black people. You have a lot of work to do. It's the law of constitutional rights. It's building up hope. When I was in Brooklyn College, they gave us a frog one day, in first class of biology, and they said, a frog can only tell extreme temperatures. And they said, if you take a frog and you put him in hot water, he jumps out. But if you take a frog and put him in cold water, and heat it gently, he cooks to death. And we prove that. And ladies and gentlemen, we are cooking. The black people are cooking. And when we wake up, we're ready to make Constitution, no Constitution, world, or no world. So the realization is that we have to create hope for those other masses of underprivileged. Thank you.
was somewhat formal, some informal. And I've started putting these stickers on my chest to the point that I've really gotten to know who I am. And so I can say with some conviction that my name is Tony Vonnegut. I come from Smithtown. Many years ago, about 30 years ago, the word ecology came into my vocabulary. And it came in by virtue of the fact that some scientists, some biologists, were saying that we were trashing the earth and that we should do something about it. And he was saying that we have a finite amount of natural resources, to which I'd like to add that human beings are natural resources too. And he said that we must make the analogy of a spaceship when we think of the earth that has these finite resources that can run out. And that's what I think we need here. We need a more global view. These initiatives are wonderful. And I recommend them in that while we're talking, at least we're not shooting. But I would like to see this extended to the nations of the world. And my proposal would be that we convoke a meeting on a global scale to which the nations would submit their best minds for conversing in these subjects. And then, more important than that, empower those people to take some certain actions that are the result of these minds having gotten together to discuss these things. The problem that I see now is that we have a paralysis in the world. On the one hand, we all say we want peace, justice, and the rest, all the things that we've heard here today. On the other hand, we give uncritical assent to the idea that human beings are intrinsically quarrelsome and they are the bad guys, and therefore they could never rally to do such a thing. But on this note, I think we should have a plan a day to resume at 10 in the morning to get down to brass tacks on where we want to go from here. I want to thank the panel of values of the Retreat for Equality. I think we've at least outlined the depths of the dangers and the possibilities. And I want to turn forward to, don't forget our phone manager for some details, and don't forget